Mr. Mueller was known for transforming the US law enforcement agency into a terrorism fighting force after the September 11 attacks in 2001. He then later became special counsel in charge of investigating ties between Russia and Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. The US president has gloated over the death, posting online celebrating the death.
Well, let's get more on the legacy that Robert Mueller leaves behind with US journalist Jay Newton-Small, who joins us now from Albuquerque. Jay, it's really interesting, Robert Mueller's rise to where he was serving two presidents, one a Republican and one a Democrat. What do you think he'll be remembered most for?
Unfortunately, I think he'll probably be most remembered for his investigation into Trump that did not lead to his impeachment, and for this sort of back and forth and the tit for tat he got into with President Trump, and that's really a tragedy because knowing Bob Mueller, he was a man who was all about honor, who was about integrity. He was about always doing the right thing and doing it in the correct way. Even if it took decades, he would want to do it in the correct way. And to be remembered for something that I think would be I think in his book, frivolous or not serious, I think would be something that he'd be really sad to be remembered for.
Yeah, well, let's go back to when he was first took office, and that was just days before the September 11 attacks in 2001. He oversaw the reshaping of the FBI into what it now is, a modern counter-terrorism agency. What sort of changes did he put in place?
Well, so when I was covering the Bush White House, we used to see Bob Mueller every Sunday. He would go to the same church service as George W. Bush did, which was the 7:45 a.m. service at St. John's. And he was so meticulous, always. He was always perfectly turned out really early on a Sunday morning. He always talked about what he was doing at the FBI, or often did with George W. Bush, with the president. And even sometimes would talk to us if there was some big case or something else that was happening. And so it became almost like a weekly ritual to see the head of the FBI every Sunday at church. And but the thing that I think he always emphasized was that to do it right often took longer. And it was, even if it took, like I said, decades to do it. And so he was never one to rush anything. He was never one to sort of say, hey, let's take the easy path, or let's not investigate fully. He always believed that you had to sort of investigate to the fullest extent of the law, even if it meant, sometimes that the law would get away from you, like it did arguably with the investigation into Donald Trump. And that, I think, really underlined the way that he oversaw the sort of remaking of the FBI in the wake of 9/11. He wanted certainly an agency that was always going to follow the rule of law, to the degree that, in fact, he was amongst the team, his counterterrorism team, blew the whistle on the CIA and told them that they, couldn't torture people in Abu Ghraib prisons, that they couldn't they'd gone too far in what they viewed as the war against terror, and had transgressed international laws that the U.S. was party to. And so he felt that, yes, it was important to protect the country in the wake of 9/11. Of course, it was important to go forth and to do important, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. At the same time, he at one point went to the Oval Office with his resignation letter in his pocket and said, I'm willing to resign if this is done too quickly, if we don't follow the rules, and if we don't actually follow what's best for humanity, in fact, and not torture people.
Yeah. Now, he served under Republican President George W. Bush and Democrat President Barack Obama. How did he rise to the challenge of not buying into bipartisanship?
So he was always one to be essentially, he was an attorney in San Francisco and in Boston before he actually joined the Justice Department. And in both those cases, those are very liberal cities. But he was always sort of the conservative, or you could argue these days liberal Republican, depending on how you look at those terms. Things have moved a lot in the ensuing years, but at the time, he was considered a pretty conservative Republican in those cities. These days, you could argue he was actually pretty liberal because the Republican Party has moved so far to the right. But he was an appointee, obviously, of George H.W. Bush to his first stint in the Justice Department, and then under his son to lead the FBI. But he very much just believed in the rule of law. And I think you saw that when, after he left, he was reappointed by Barack Obama to continue to run the FBI. But then even after he'd left office, he joined Wilmer Hale, which was a big DC law firm. But he left Wilmer Hale because he was bored and he loved being the person to go in and to change things, to do the right thing. And he went back as just a simple criminal attorney under, the Holder Justice Department Attorney General Eric Holder in the Obama era, just to try murders in Washington, D.C., because he just felt he wanted to spend his career doing the best thing for the world and doing the thing that was good for his community. In that case, it was bringing down the murder rate in Washington.